Hi there. I want to talk to you today about poor argumentative writing and some of the problems that might arise in your papers if you're not careful. First, let me list some of the areas to focus on in your revision stage. Your thesis, supporting your ideas with a source, considering counter-arguments, refuting the counter-arguments, and considering the rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, and logos. Read up on these areas so that you're sure you understand how to achieve the strongest quality of each of these. I'm going to show you a single paragraph from the essay that has some work to do in some of these areas. So the student's thesis statement starts here and discusses what he plans on proving in his essay. So he's going to evaluate two pieces of writing from the early 1900s and late 1800s and apply them in a modern context to today's African American families. So his first main point in this paragraph is one of the most significant issues among the African American community today is the amount of children growing up in single-parent households. My first issue with that statement is that it's not clear what he means by significant issues. If he wants to prove that this is a problem, he needs to state that clearly. It needs to be part of his position. So in his thesis, he's just talking about African American families or the African American community. Never once did he say there's a problem that needs to be solved. That has to be part of the thesis if that's what he plans to prove in his body paragraphs. So something in here needs to be established as a problem, and then he needs to continue stating that it's a problem. He's trying, I think, not to say that, which makes you wonder why. If he's confident in his position, why is he so reluctant to state that it's a problem? Okay? So that needs to be changed. The thesis needs to be strengthened and a position needs to be taken, and he needs the language to mirror that thesis statement throughout his essay. So in looking at this paragraph and thinking about the video that we just talked about for this writing an argument essay, the video gave you a diagram of an argumentative paragraph, and it asks you to focus on certain elements, such as having a topic sentence that establishes your claim, backing up your claim with evidence, discussing a counter argument, and refuting or having a rebuttal to that counter argument. And we need to also explain, after we provide the evidence, we need to have a warrant. What does that evidence do to prove your case? So there's basically essentially 5 elements that you need to cover throughout these paragraphs. And it mirrors that video that we have in our module. So he has made a claim, a statement that's supposed to connect to his thesis. We need to improve the language of it, though, and have it be what he aims to prove. If you look at the language in this paragraph, he starts to say there's a problem, there's crime, there's delinquency. None of that appears here, though. He's just saying it's a significant issue. Okay, you need to be more specific with this being a claim. You can't beat around the bush. Say what you mean to say. If you feel that you are wrong and that there isn't a way to prove this, you need to reconsider your position and you need to reconsider your claims. Don't try to hide or not say what you really want to say. If you think that there's no way to say what you're trying to say, then there's a problem with your claim. You've got some reconsidering to do. Okay? So after he makes this weak statement or claim, he goes on to prove that there's a percentage of black children raised in single-parent households. He says it's the highest of any racial group, and he gives you the number 2 on the list, which doesn't really make sense why he would include that. He's not going to talk about the American Indian at all. The effect of growing up in a single-parent household is significant. Again, I think he's trying to avoid saying what he wants to say. So I would change that language. He says, and he gives us an example of the effect. According to a study, children who are raised in a single-parent household are significantly more delinquent. So now we have something that he's actually trying to prove, that living in a single-parent household makes a child more delinquent. Now, that's a correlation that he needs to prove further, and you will see that he doesn't. He says it happens, but he doesn't prove that it's true in all ways. And even the source itself says there are certain ways where this is not the case, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So this idea of higher levels of delinquency is based on single-parent households. But later on, when we get to near the end of this paragraph, he starts talking about violent crimes and how these are all connected. The delinquency equals violent crime. Well, if you look at the definition of delinquency, you see it says it's typically of a young person, and it's showing or characterized by a tendency to commit crime, particularly minor crime. So now we have a disconnect in what he wants to say about violent crime and delinquency. Those are two different things, and he can't correlate those two. It's a slippery slope. Your single-parent household is going to turn your delinquent child into a violent criminal. That's a definite slippery slope fallacy. So you have to be careful of that. I looked at the statistics that he used, and he talked about single-parent households and how the black children have the highest incidence of this in their household. But the overall number of single-parent households is 35%. So that needs to be taken into account. 66% is a high number. 35% though shows that more families have two-parent households. But again, we're trying to figure out, is it really a problem? Is single-parent households the problem, or is there something else that's contributing to these problems? Looking at his other source, one of his other sources on the works cited, the source itself says, although these differences are reduced once the authors account for various family processes. So that includes single-parent households where the father is present in the children's lives, or single-parent households where there's a good support system outside of the parents, meaning grandparents or other guardians. So the source itself is counter-arguing these facts. And then I looked up delinquency. This is my own, this isn't a source that the student used. I looked up delinquency on my own, and I thought to myself, well, what does contribute to delinquency? If he hasn't proven that single-parent households in and of themselves contribute to it, what does? And it could be that some of these other factors are why we have single-parent households to begin with. The mother needs to get away from a domestic violence situation. And so it's not her leaving that caused the problem and made a single-parent household. It's the violence that caused the problem. Financial issues, drug or alcohol abuse, poor schoolwork, lack of school attendance, peer pressure, boredom. These are factors that are listed for delinquency. They may be related to the single-parent household, but they're not exclusive to the single-parent household. These things happen in two-parent households as well. So one of the biggest issues that happened with that essay is that he did not consider the counter-argument at all. We got to the end of that paragraph with no consideration of what it means outside of the single-parent household, outside of that one box that he's put us in. He didn't talk about the successes in a single-parent household. So you have to consider all those elements that we discussed in our modules. If you recall, the following that paragraph model is something that you want to do to make sure you're covering all the elements of good argument. So hopefully you see that there are ways that you can go wrong in this essay, and you want to make sure each of your paragraphs, every single paragraph, is following the tenets of good argument.